Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Rob Zambrano, the Clinical Director for Stress and Anxiety Services, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's free presentation on using therapy skills to cope with financial panic during turbulent times. We're going to be posting this presentation on our website where we list all of the CE training offerings that our practice has to offer. Um, as of the time that I'm recording this, this is not currently planned to be for CEs, but I might adapt it at some point. We wanted to get this done in a timely manner, given the idea that the topic itself is based on current events. So, but I'm sure the advice that I provide will be evergreen for folks who are hoping to learn more about coping with financial panic and anxiety during turbulent times. Guessing this won't be the last time we have some turbulence in our financial markets and lives. So hopefully it'll be somewhat evergreen. But I thank you all for joining us and invite you to check out our really good library that we're proud of, all the presentations that we give, trying to teach folks about the work we do. Anyhow, before we get started, this is intended to be a nonpartisan presentation. However, I am a partisan person. It's one of my identities, right? And so we're going to acknowledge in this presentation how our identities impact how we view the world, and maybe make us vulnerable to some kinds of anxiety. As a therapist, of course, I always try and stay neutral in my role as therapist, so I don't judge folks for having certain beliefs. My job is just to sort of help people deal with whatever anxiety that they're struggling with. And so, regardless of political affiliation, socioeconomic group, diversity group, etc., um, I hope that the information we present today is helpful to everybody. And again, I present it in that spirit. Disclaimer. I don't always do a great job of following the advice I'm about to give. Even though I'm a psychologist, it doesn't mean I'm immune from struggling with stress and anxiety on occasion myself, and not always handling it as well as I'd like to. I try to practice what I teach, but like a lot of people, it can be more challenging when it comes to uncertainty about my family's financial well-being. That's one of those things that hits a button for me and it hits close to home. By teaching others, I remind myself that I can do better at this too, right? So one of the awesome things about giving this presentation is as much as I hope it's helpful for you guys, it's kind of a reminder for myself to sort of balance myself, use my skills when I notice really high levels of anxiety about any particular topic. So again, this can be applied to any number of stressors. Also, another important disclaimer, I am not by any stretch of the imagination a financial expert, so please do not construe anything I say in this presentation to be financial advice. Focus on the therapy skills that we're going to talk about today, and how it applies to dealing with financial uncertainty and the anxiety that it breeds. A quick diversity statement. As I mentioned a moment ago, this presentation recognizes that the experience of anxiety in response to economic stressors is shaped by diverse cultural, socioeconomics, and individual backgrounds. The application of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, must be flexible, culturally sensitive, and mindful of the systemic factors that influence mental health, while of course staying true to the protocol that we like to follow to help people. We're committed to presenting CBT skills in a way that honors individuals' lived experiences and adapts to various cultural and contextual needs. Our goal is to equip all participants with practical evidence-based tools while acknowledging unique challenges faced by diverse populations during times of economic uncertainty. And so, as a first generation Latino American, I'm bringing my own sort of cultural lens and how my experiences may have influenced what my reaction was. And so, hopefully, me sharing this is helpful as a way of guiding others to learn how they could navigate their own variables and factors. So, some goals for this presentation is to learn about what fuels your anxiety and a sense of the beliefs that may fuel it. Learn about coping skills aimed at getting us through difficult moments. Learn how to apply skills learned in cognitive behavioral therapy to deal with difficult emotions that come from our automatic responses to uncertainty. Uncertainty can be really triggering for a lot of folks, right? And as I mentioned earlier, there are certain buttons of uncertainty that some are more reactive to than others. Learn to focus on what is within your control while accepting what you can't control. This is fundamental wisdom that's really important for us to practice and learn. So what inspired me to do this free presentation? On the day that I started working on this presentation, the market was in a free fall, the stock market, for several days, and I was highly anxious about how much money I was losing and worrying a lot about my future and the future of my loved ones. I was losing sleep and I was really scared. Um, then, shortly after I sort of talked to my staff about putting together this presentation, the president announced a 90-day pause on the tariff policy that at the time got the markets in an uproar and had us in this sort of free fall situation that I found so unnerving. Um, so the market started to recover, but many are still predicting a prolonged recession. So, I am, like I said, not an economist, not an expert in any way, shape, or form, but I have seen some things along the lines that are predicting this as an issue. And of course, I wanted to read up and find out more about how that could impact me and my family. I don't like how badly this impacted me. That was really important to me, right? I want to prepare to manage my anxiety more effectively if something like this happens again. And of course, if you live long enough, you're going to go through these ups and downs. As I said earlier, by helping others, I remember how to help myself. I also want to give a really brief and special thanks to a very dear friend of mine of over 25 years, Dr. David Crease, who, through monitoring my social media presence, noticed that I was getting pretty anxious, and he knows me better than most. So we went out and over a pair of hamburgers and some good drinks, we kind of hashed out. And he reminded me of really some simple things, some basics that I apply to my clients and that I needed to apply to myself. And just asking me the simple question, um, what do you think is going to happen? Right. And having me say it out loud in a kind of structured and organized way really helped me put into perspective how much I was panicking, how much distorted thinking I was having, and how I again needed to get my game back into shape so that I could manage this anxiety. He also made a very generous offer to always have my back financially if I needed his help, which was greatly appreciated, and I'm hoping to never have to utilize. But I think that's really important as well, is that sense of having friends, family, community as a resource to help us out when times get difficult, or we should actually say if times get difficult. But for some, they are going through difficult times. There's already people who are experiencing layoffs, loss of jobs, who were just getting by, whose economic picture is more strained than ever with the increasing prices that we've experienced over the last 4 years or so. So, we want to keep in mind that hopefully these skills are helpful in some way to those folks who are experiencing anxiety on a different end of the financial spectrum. A little background about myself. As I mentioned, I am the proud son of two Colombian immigrants and grew up working class. We always struggled financially, and there was always a lot of stress around money. So I remember growing up hearing my parents kind of whisper about which bills are we going to pay this month and how are we going to pay rent, given certain situations, right? Um, but my dad did have a union job, decent paying, right? So I would never say that we were particularly poor, but there was always that economic anxiety in our lives. So he worked in a factory in Edison, New Jersey, for a cosmetic company called Revlon. He worked there for 20 years, and it was a really important job for him. It was, he had kind of a supervisory position there. He had a group of friends that he had worked with for many years and knew well. It was his daily context. It was his structure. And, you know, in the early 90s, Revlon moved the factory to Arizona where they could pay new workers lower salaries and increase profits. And this is even though Revlon, I believe, was fairly profitable during that period of the 90s when my father got laid off. So through no fault of his own other than, company looking to maximize profit and hire cheaper employees, he got laid off, which was very difficult on his mental health, and he struggled for many years, having difficulty finding financial stability. So our family struggled, and as well, and eventually we ended up in a situation where we filed for bankruptcy and we lost our home. So I think experiences like that shape my own beliefs and my own vulnerabilities, and might explain why I struggled so much. And again, I'm sharing this because I think we all need to be aware of what are our own beliefs, what are our own reasons for struggling so that we can be more mindful of and aware of, how they impact us in the here and impact us in the here and now. Now, what's interesting is I talk a lot about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which we're going to learn about today. But CBT doesn't tend to be a very past focused therapy, right? So we don't talk a whole heck of a lot of the origins um, of some of our psychological issues. It tends to be more symptom focused and what are some skills we can apply to have symptom relief. But I do think as we learn the skill of identifying what our thoughts are, what we tell ourselves, and how that impacts us, it's almost inevitable that we get more in contact with our beliefs that are fueling our fears. And we probably become more intimately aware of where those beliefs are coming from. So again, there's a little more background. As a result of what happened in my family, I developed a lifelong dislike of corporate greed and distrust in the concept of investing. I didn't possess a lot of financial literacy, and to in some ways that was intentional. I didn't want to invest in the stock market. I thought that greedy investors who were demanding higher profits were the reason that my dad lost his job and our family was hurt. Um, so I didn't want to be part of that world. And so since I was opposed to investing, I wasn't interested in learning much about it. I always just said that that was gambling for upper class people and not me. Um, I've always been, of course, given the experience that we had, very anxious about losing money. So I tended to focus for most of my adult life on the idea of just spend conservatively, right? Live beneath your means, right? So, I typically am the guy who buys a used car and then drives it for 10 years and patches it up here and there and makes sure I have really good maintenance rather than buying a brand new fancy car, right? And also, of course, paying down debt. To me, that was the dream. Pay off your debt, own your home. They can't take it from you, right? Now, of course, I know that's simplistic and not entirely accurate, but that's always been my mentality. I also highly value work-life balance, right? So I make a very good living. I'm really blessed and fortunate, but I've also never been the guy who's looking to work as many hours as humanly possible so I could, you know, um, create as big a safety net as I could, right? Now, during this crisis, part of me is like, gosh, I wish I did. Um, but when I pull back, I don't think that's actually in keeping with my values, right? Which again, I think are important things for us to be in touch with and honor, right? So part of my values was having a good work-life balance, making sure I have plenty of time um, to exercise, be the husband I want to be the son I want to be the father I want to be. Those roles, as much as I love being a psychologist, those roles are always going to be top priority for me. And so I want to keep as much as I love my job and the folks I work with, I want to keep that in balance with making sure that I don't work so much and that I'm not pursuing money so aggressively that I'm ignoring the most important aspects of my life. But, again, I am a professional. I'm a doctor. I make a good living. I work at a really well-respected practice. And, as life had it, we moved up in the world. So, although my wife and I were making a good living, we remained fiscally conservative and we saved a lot of money that just sat in our savings account. And I got to admit, I loved watching those numbers grow and grow and grow with each passing month, each passing year that we spent together and made these good decisions, right? It was really cool for both of us to sort of have that sense of, wow, we're doing it. Um, After our son was born, however, his future became more of a priority for us. And so I think our mentality shifted a little bit more towards certain needs. So we moved to a more affluent community for the schools, right? And no regrets. I love where I live. The schools have been phenomenal and a real big benefit for my son who has some special needs. Um, but our mortgage and property taxes were a lot higher. So the expenses start going up. And then you start thinking a little bit more about, okay, do I have enough for retirement? Do I have enough money saved uh, to take care of my son if he needs our help, extending into adulthood? So I realized that capitalism wasn't going away, even if I chose not to invest in the stock market. So I met with a financial advisor, who one of my colleagues recommended for me, who helped me understand that investing made more financial sense than just paying down debt, right? That in the long run, you can make more off of, the rising value of stocks and other investments than, you would get by paying things off in advance, and, maintaining low debt. So not only did I move up in the world, but now I'm selling out. So exaggerating a little bit, I hope. But so I started participating in my company's Roth 401k program, but we still had a lot of money in our savings account for many years. And again, I hope this doesn't sound like a humble brag or, first world problems. I know there might be people out there listening who are in a completely different part of the economic spectrum and only wish that they had the problems that I'm dealing with, right? So again, I'm just sort of presenting my own context, but hopefully the things we talk about in a moment can be useful for everybody. So anyhow, this past September, finally, after saving money and having that savings account grow and grow and grow, This past September 2024, we decided as a family to finally start investing our money rather than have it sitting in savings and not keeping up with inflation. And then the election happened, right? As I mentioned earlier, I am a partisan guy. I have some very strict political beliefs, some very long-held political beliefs, I should say, that influenced my outlook about how great America would be moving forward. That's probably a little hint of what I'm thinking. Um, so Dr. Z gets anxious. So unfortunately, another factor that made things more difficult for me, again, one person's personal context that creates vulnerabilities. Before the election, my father passed away and I became responsible for managing my mother's finances. So now I'm sort of deep in that sort of sandwich generation kind of phenomenon that people talk about, where I'm worried about, making sure that there's enough money for my mom's financial security, moving on to for the rest of her life, so that she can live the way that she really deserves to, while also making sure I have enough money to be able to take care of my son and my family, right? So I called our financial advisor, the one who we gave a boatload of money to back in September, and I expressed my concerns about the results of the election. And he assured me that regardless of what happens, you know, um, markets go up and markets go down. Sometimes, if you're in it for the long haul, when they go down, that's a wonderful opportunity, right? So, okay, I kind of understood that, right? And he reminded me that, I had shared with him that I personally am not planning on retiring anytime for the next 20 years or more. I'm lucky enough, blessed enough that I really love my job, and I'm hoping to work there as long as I can. And, he said, so as long as you're patient and don't panic, even if the market dips, you'll be okay. Right. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking the guy who got elected to the White House is well, let's call him unique individual, right? Who seems to stir things up and take big swings, make radical choices. And, I just wondered what if he makes a big swing or a radical choice that backfires for our economy? Um, but again, I reminded myself, you know, I'm an expert in panic disorder. It's what I wrote my dissertation on. It's one of my favorite things to treat. So if something happens, I'm sure I'll know what to do. I won't panic, right? And then something happens and I panicked, right? So um, President Trump sort of announced his tariffs, which was something I was hearing a lot about during the campaign. So it shouldn't have come as a total surprise, but I would also hear that it was just a tactic to try and scare people into giving him favorable deals. He'll never do it, right? And then, a lot of us saw this really famous image with all the tariffs and the calculations. And again, this is not about one's personal opinion about the president or his followers or his voters. This, for me, hopefully, this presentation is mostly about, again, how the current events that are affected by, individuals in power really freaked me out and how I'd like to handle it better. So that was a screenshot I took from the Dow Jones Industrial Average over the course of a month. Um, I think on the day that I made this slide. So let's be honest, money is important to folks, right? In the great words of the 80s philosopher Madonna, we're living in a material world and I am a material boy. Um, anyway, anyhow, everyone who is struggling with anxiety about the economy has their own personal reasons for experiencing strong emotions. We get triggered by uncertainty, our beliefs about what the future might hold, and our what ifs. What ifs are a big, big part of anxiety, guys. Our ability to anticipate the future can be a blessing, but also a curse, right? So anticipating the future, having a heads up, or getting some sort of general feel of something that could happen gives us the opportunity to make adjustments, to plan ahead, etc. But if we overdo it, then it becomes a massive source of anxiety, overthinking, stress, and suffering. And so we want to make sure that we're able to do a good job of knowing the difference between the two and being able to use clinical skills to manage that urge. And one of the things we also try and teach our clients is rather than ignore or suppress feelings, our job is to use psychological skills to manage them more effectively and be wise about controlling what we can. So let's talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT basics, right? So in a nutshell, one of the things we try and teach our clients is to learn what triggers their anxiety. Get a sense of, are there behaviors that are sustaining that anxiety, making it worse, that are just not helping you? So sometimes when we review what someone's doing or thinking, we ask, are those thoughts realistic? Are they fair? Are they helpful? And most of the time, they're not, right? But we want to get a better sense of what triggers and also very importantly, what maintains anxiety, right? Experiencing anxiety is normal. Having a feeling is no big deal. No one should ever be worried about having a feeling, right? But then we have to sort of worry about when that feeling sort of lingers and continues and sort of has an impact and sort of wears us down. That's where anxiety really turns into stress and suffering, right? So CBT is all about learning and using being the operative word, coping skills, right? And again, I'll fess up, I wasn't using my coping skills very well. I was doing a lot of the stuff you're not supposed to do, right? CBT really focuses a lot on identifying and challenging automatic thoughts that fuel anxiety. We're going to learn a lot more about that in a moment. Um, we're also going to incorporate things like practicing radical acceptance of things you can't control. So what does that mean? Radical acceptance doesn't mean I'm happy about something happening that I don't like happening. It's really just saying that we're not going to focus on how things should be. We're going to focus on how they actually are so that we can make wise plans, so that we can adapt, so that we can plan within reason, and we can sort of orient ourselves towards those realities rather than sort of focus on how things we'd like them to be, how they should be, etc. Aligning your behaviors with your values, even if it's really uncomfortable, right? Um, that's a super big challenge for me, right? So I've mentioned earlier that I want to maintain some work-life balance, but I've got to admit that I also, during a time of anxiety, tend to scoop up more clients. Now, fortunately, I never compromise my ability to do my job well, so I would never take on so many clients that I can't feel like I'm doing a high quality job. That's, I think, the part where I would draw a line, right? But I do think from time to time I take on more clients than is good for my own ability to maintain the work-life balance that's really so important. So even during times like this where my anxiety says, get as much money as you can, save as much money as you can, I want to make sure that I'm still living the life that I want to live within reason, right? But also making reasonable adjustments. The other part of CBT, which I think is really important, is answering your what ifs, making a plan, and committing to that plan until new knowledge comes into play. You're going to notice I reference that several times today because I think that's an important part of this process. So, what triggers and maintains fear? Again, really important stuff. So, checking behaviors, right? So, we all have at our hands this amazing piece of technology that is always loaded with information, right? So, at any time, I could grab my phone and see what's the stock market doing today, or I can go on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. It's always going to be Twitter for me. I can go on Twitter and scroll through it. And because the algorithm has figured out that I'm slowing down every time there was news about the economy, right? Or news that doubles down on my own personal biases about certain political beliefs, right? I was entering willingly an echo chamber that was maintaining and stoking my fear, right? And it's irrelevant as to whether or not the information I was gathering was accurate or not, was biased or, fact-based. At some point, I can only read the same thing so many times before I have to admit to myself, this is no longer about being informed, right? This is about something bigger and unhealthy, right? And to some degree, maybe I was engaging them in some reassurance seeking. Maybe I was hoping to see some economist who said, guys, here's why everybody's overreacting and you're going to be okay. But it turns out every time I saw that, I was like, that person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're just trying to get clicks. Everybody else in my feed, again, which is catered towards my worldviews, right, is saying the president is insane or he's, trying to intentionally destroy America, or he's not trying to intentionally destroy America. He just doesn't know what he's doing and he's making terrible decisions and, et cetera, right? And so I really had to work on curtailing that, right? In fact, to be honest with you, I deleted Twitter from my phone. And really the only access I have to Twitter is when I'm on my computer, which isn't nearly as much as on my phone. So that was a huge improvement for me. And I noticed right away that that made a big difference for myself, right? Checking behaviors, by the way, were also keeping me up at night. I was literally tossing and turning. And then I would, like a lot of folks, this is stuff I would tell any of my clients not to do, right? But again, we're all vulnerable from time to time. I would grab my phone and start scrolling when I should be going to sleep, which made it harder to fall asleep, which meant I was more tired the next day when I felt like I had to make important decisions and gather more information to decide how to make these important decisions. So you can see how these things spiral out of control with just something as simple as engaging in excessive checking behaviors. I also engaged in a lot of reassurance seeking. I looked out for some of my smarter friends who I know have invested longer and know a lot more about this stuff than I do, right? And I got different answers as to how they were responding. Some people were saying, look, there's nothing we can do. Let's, but for folks my age, we're in it for the long game. We're going to be okay. You know, and other people said, no, 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 this is the time to dump all your money and put it in different places. I'd get different answers, and none of them helped me reach any kind of conclusion. I just sought the next form of reassurance, the next form of information. I also think, and this is not always easy for me, it is important that I not believe everything I think. And you guys might have to work on that as well, right? So I might have to be open to the idea that maybe everything isn't going to turn out as horribly as my brain is predicting, right? Maybe, even though I'm not a fan of the president, I doubt I will ever be, maybe either A, he does have some sort of strategy that I don't quite understand because I'm not an economist, right? Maybe I don't give him enough credit because of the, again, uh, highly catered media feeds that I review might have biased how I view the person in a potentially unfair way. So I actually want to be humble about the idea of I might be wrong about some things. Things might not turn out as horribly as I think they will, right? And so as I mentioned, I have to stop the doom scrolling on social media to help balance that a little bit, right? One of the things I think is also really important for us to recognize is when we are overthinking. And I always try and explain to my clients that overthinking is an attempt to treat emotions like a puzzle that can be solved rather than an emotion to be managed, right? So my own overthinking was my attempt to find the perfect foolproof. If I do this, my money's going to be safe and I won't regret any of the choices I made. I'm going to be so smart and I'm going to be so glad I followed my gut, right? But the problem is, there is no amount of thinking, no amount of information gathering that is going to give me the ability to come up with a plan that my brain won't second guess and doubt and want to rethink and reanalyze, etc. Right? So that overthinking, we have to be mindful of how, again, that sustains the suffering, it fuels the anxiety, and it turns it into panic, right? And so we've got to deal with that. So one of the ways we deal with it is using coping skills. So I like to teach my clients things like, and we won't have time to do these things today, but things like breathing skills, right? Learning how to breathe properly, not hyperventilate so that our brains are working at good capacity, that we're not making things worse for our ability to work these things out and use our coping skills. Muscle relaxation, if you guys ever want to look it up on YouTube, just you can type progressive muscle relaxation. You'll find people with way more soothing voices than mine who will guide you through these activities that really are aimed at relaxing the body, slowing things down, giving your brain a chance to not constantly be in fight or flight mode looking for some way out of your suffering, right? Without, and of course, realizing that doing that is prolonging the suffering, elongating the suffering, right? It is totally okay to engage in hobbies. I am so, so grateful that I have a 9.5-year-old at home who really still likes playing soccer with me and watching Bigfoot videos with me. Um, and sometimes, showing me silly YouTube videos. That is a godsend, right? Because he's such a grounding force in my life that during those really anxious times when I was panicking about all this stuff, it was a really big relief for me to say to myself, these moments with this kid is way more important than all the things I'm worried about, right? That I'm never getting this moment back, so let's commit to this moment, right? So that was me being present, and that was a great relief, right? But if you don't have a 9.5-year-old kiddo at home to distract you, it is okay to engage in hobbies. It's not going to make those bad feelings go away, but it just means that we don't have to stay fixated on those bad feelings. We don't have to be all about those feelings. We can just experience those feelings and say, maybe while I'm experiencing these feelings, I'll go do valued behaviors anyway. Exercise is key, right? Behind me, you can't see her, but I've got my dog. She's in a crate taking a nap. We go for long walks every day. And so when I was freaking out, I was going for long walks while scrolling through Twitter. And so when I turned the corner and got rid of Twitter, I was like, oh, wow. In fact, it felt so strange to not have something to scroll and look at, right? Because my Facebook feed doesn't tend to be as triggering as Twitter was. So it just felt weird. I almost felt like this, like, oh, now what I look at, what do I focus on? And I remembered that, you know, walking is a good form of meditation. We'll talk about that more in a moment as well. But walking my dog every day for a couple of miles, That was good exercise for her and me. It's a good opportunity for me to be present, to enjoy. I live in a beautiful neighborhood, thankfully. Got lots of nice trees and beautiful houses that I can look at. So that exercise and that sort of controlling my focus, that was really helpful stuff. And again, like I said, engaging in valued behaviors, spending time with loved ones, doing volunteer work, stuff that sort of gives your brain an island to rest on. It's all good. Mindfulness meditation is a thing we teach as well. So what is mindfulness meditation? It's a practice that involves focusing your attention on the present judgment in a, I'm sorry, the present moment in a non-judgmental way. It often includes techniques such as paying attention to your breath, observing your thoughts and sensations in a non-attached way, and gently bringing your focus back whenever your mind wanders. This practice helps reduce stress, improve concentration, and promote emotional well-being by fostering greater awareness of your thoughts and feelings while learning not to get caught up in them. Now, the embarrassing thing for me, guys, is I'm really good at this. I've been practicing meditation since I was 17 years old. So I've been doing it a long time, right? I do it kind of privately. I find about 5 or 10 minutes most days, not every day, but most days, to sit quietly, to just breathe, to focus on my thoughts and noticing what's happening in my brain, almost as if I'm observing it, but not attached to it, right? So sometimes I even label, oh, I notice my brain is having thoughts about the stock market. I notice the urge to open my eyes and look at the phone and check the sticker. I notice that when I do that, my heart starts racing. And then I just keep breathing, and eventually I kind of bring it back to the breath. And then maybe something else enters my head, and I'll just notice that, notice that. So what we're doing is we're practicing not attaching, right? Now, the opposite of that would be attaching. So if I had the thought about the stock market and I did open my eyes and I started planning and working on and looking at the ticker on my phone, now I'm focused on the thing that is fueling my anxiety. And we have to give our brains breaks, right? We have to be able to say, let's just notice that thought and practice not getting attached to the thought, caught up in the thought. I'm really good at that. I just had to remember to apply it to this thing because my brain fooled me. It does that to all, it does it to all of us, right? My brain fooled me into thinking this requires immediate attention, right? And the truth is, most things don't require immediate attention. Like if your house is on fire and you smell smoke, that requires immediate attention. Get out, right? If somebody is chasing you with a knife or a gun, no time to meditate, run, get out of there, right? So those are moments where we do require immediate action and response. Most other things, we're allowed to say, not now. I'm not going to think about this now. I'm not going to attach to that thought. I'm just going to use coping techniques if that thought makes me feel really uncomfortable feelings that I'm having a hard time managing. The ones we just referenced in the previous slide. Cognitive therapy. This is stuff I love doing. Get excited about this. Cognitive therapy teaches that our brains have automatic thoughts and that these thoughts kind of come from our beliefs, right? And those beliefs kind of come from, as I mentioned earlier, those experiences we have, the things we're taught, the culture we're raised in. So many factors, I won't go into it, but those generate our automatic thoughts. Now, our perceptions can have biases that we refer to as cognitive distortions. Talk more about that in a moment. Um, Automatic thoughts trigger feelings, right? So the feelings that we have are based on what we're telling ourselves. And intense feelings can make decision making more difficult and just keep us in a cycle of repeating worries. So when we're really terrified, we often just repeat the what if question without actually slowing down and seeing, is there an answer to that what if question? What would I do in that situation? That's why when my friend asked me, Rob, what do you think is going to happen? Right? I had to slow down and say out loud, my brain is telling me that we're going to end up in an economic depression. I'll end up homeless. I won't be able to take care of the people I love, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as I said that out loud, as scary as those thoughts sound, I also realized I don't think that's actually going to happen. I think that's just what my brain is afraid of, right? And that's again why we teach mindfulness, because we're trying to identify what our brain says, and we're trying to step back and look at what our brain says and go, huh, I think that might be a little exaggerated. I think that might be somewhat distorted. Right. Now, again, keeping in mind for some people it's not. Some people really live on the edge and they're having a hard time getting by. What I can also remind you guys is from my earlier slide, I did live on the edge, right? I lived in a family that went through a bankruptcy, that struggled with a lot of economic issues. And even then, somehow, some way, we found a way to survive, right? That doesn't mean some people don't fall through the cracks, but I also have to say most people don't. Doesn't mean we have the outcomes we want and everything works out perfectly, but it does mean more often than not, the story doesn't end with, and then we're homeless, and then, we starve to death, right? So that, just that simple question from my dear friend was really helpful. What do you think is going to happen? Saying it out loud or writing it on a piece of paper gives us infinitely more ability to analyze it and challenge it than when it just repeats in our head over and over and over again. Thoughts inside of here, we believe them so much more than when they're outside of our head. It's really fascinating how that works. Anyhow, we also teach in cognitive therapy that feelings impact our choices, right? So when we're scared, we might be more impulsive. We might make worse choices, right? So let's keep that in mind. So in cognitive therapy, we learn to be more aware of our automatic thoughts that trigger emotions. We learn the difference between what is possible and what is probable. So in my instance, I suppose it's possible. America has gone through some economic depressions, and we hear those stories about people living in tent villages in Central Park. Something strongly tells me that just because that's possible, it doesn't mean it's likely. I don't think this is likely, these thoughts that I'm having, right? Now we can have great empathy, and hopefully in a kind society, we can try and help those people who do fall through the cracks and end up in those situations, right? Or we can figure out what can we do to be help as well? What can we control? We learn to identify cognitive distortions. Again, that's, I think, the next slide. We learn to be more critical of our thoughts. Again, don't believe everything you think. We learn to see things from a different perspective. That's going to be important. We learn to respond to our what if questions more effectively. And we commit to controlling what we can. Those are really key components to cognitive and behavioral therapy, right? And focus more on the cognitive point, but let's also remember behavioral is about choices we make, right? Facing our fears, right? So automatic thoughts. Automatic thoughts are quick, involuntary thoughts that pop into our mind in response to a situation. They often reflect our core beliefs and can be negative or distorted, influencing emotions and behavior without us fully realizing it. Part of my job as a therapist is to help us become more aware of what are the automatic thoughts that are influencing how we feel and how we act. Our automatic thoughts are not voluntary. It's not my fault that I have my thoughts. I probably could do a better job of managing the thoughts that I had, but I was not in control of what thought I experienced, right? Those thoughts are a byproduct of many variables, like I mentioned earlier, like our age, our gender, our identity, our experiences, our upbringing, where we grew up, when we grew up, who we grew up around, and of course, our genetics. All of those can influence those things. Somebody could have been raised in the exact same household as me, might be the same gender as me, might have so many other variables, but just a slightly different genetic profile might get you different results. So those cognitive distortions we talked about, I'm not going to have time to go through all of them, but these particular ones I kind of picked on purpose because I thought they were relevant to my anxiety and the anxiety I think others are struggling with. So cognitive distortions are biased ways of thinking that negatively affect emotions and behavior. These distortions often reinforce negative thought patterns and beliefs, contributing to issues like anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. So some of those distortions, the first one we'll list is what we call fortune telling. So that's predicting that things will turn out badly. So you could probably already see a lot of my anxiety was about fortune telling, about what's going to happen to this country, what's going to happen to our economy, what's going to happen to me and my family, right? And so catastrophizing, again, I may have been probably, I should say, I definitely was, magnifying the importance of that stock market drop, even though, you know, there's clear data, there's clear ways of saying that, oh, I am losing money, but I think the catastrophizing was magnifying like how important all my money wasn't gone. I was still in a situation where I was able to take care of my daily expenses. If there was an emergency, I still had enough money to handle those emergencies, right? But my brain went to homelessness, right? And starving, catastrophes, and maybe, some of uh, the remnants of old fears I had when I was a young adult, going through a bankruptcy and experiencing having to vacate our home. There's a lot of should statements. You'll see that in a moment, but should statements are holding rigid rules about how you and others should behave, leading to feelings of guilt and frustration. Hindsight thinking isn't fair or compassionate, right? So a lot of should statements are also about things we should have done. Hindsight thinking, right? Now, part of my personal makeup is I am prone to guilt and self-doubt, right? I hate when I make mistakes, beat myself up, right? And so this idea that maybe I made some mistakes in my financial choices, or I might make more mistakes in my financial choices, that was pretty triggering for a guy like me for whom responsibility is a really big central part of my character, of my personality, right? So knowing that about myself over the years through my own therapy and sort of self-discovery, I've become pretty aware of, but not immune to my own beliefs, biases, and distortions. A few more. Overgeneralization. Seeing one event as a never-ending pattern of defeat, right? So, my thought, even after seeing a slight recovery of the numbers in the stock market, right? My brain says, yes, but this president is chaotic. And so we're going to experience things like this every few months. And eventually the world's going to get tired of us and we're going to be in big trouble, right? So there's some overgeneralization there in terms of predicting that this is going to keep happening over and over and over again. Now, keep in mind, if you asked me today, I'd say I put money on that prediction. I really do believe that maybe the next 3.5 years are going to involve more unexpected choices by the president or choices that are, I think, not the right response, but what do I know, right? Um, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't give the folks in the White House enough credit for their ability to learn and adapt to stuff like this, right? So I might be overgeneralizing and fortune telling, right? Personalization, blaming yourself for things that might not be your fault or in your control. So we're going to reference that a little bit later in terms of my own personalization of, right? It's my fault that I made certain choices, and it's going to be my fault if we are led to economic ruin. Disqualifying the positive, rejecting positive information that doesn't match your worldview, right? So in my case, I'm inclined to, and I have to be cautious of disqualifying the positive in terms of, okay, the president may have made some choices that I didn't agree with, but he did pause those tariffs, right? Maybe he is going to really negotiate really well. He has a reputation for that. Maybe the results of those negotiations will be positive. Um, but I should not completely disqualify the idea that, okay, they did pivot. I have to at least credit that, not ignore that, not disqualify that when I look at, you know, um, my own analysis of the future. But again, that's a potential trap because we can't completely predict the future. We can make predictions, but we'll never be able to do that with certainty. So here are some automatic thoughts that people could experience in response to these events, right? So one of them, the president that I mentioned earlier, the president will continue to pursue economic policies that will lead to trade wars, high unemployment, and rising inflation. This will make life more expensive and will produce strong anti-American sentiments that will make economic recovery more prolonged and painful. Our retirement portfolio will lose a ton of value and will seriously impact not just our retirement plans, but our lifestyle in the here and now, right? If inflation gets bad enough, if my income goes down, right, that how does that not have an effect on my present experience, right? I'd have to make adjustments. Another automatic thought, with cost of living going up and my mom on a limited income, she will need more financial assistance from me. That's fortune telling. I don't know that for certain, but it's a fear that I have, right? And it's not that, of course, I wouldn't help my mom with an open heart and willingness, but then that part of me that worries about the future gets activated, right? And I have to do a better job of managing that, right? Not blaming you, mom, if you're watching, but you're not watching. I know you. So, a few more automatic thoughts. People will not be able to afford therapy. Again, there's some. Oh, let me go back. The president will continue to pursue. Again, that's. Oh, I mentioned that. Sorry. So that's that fortune telling and overgeneralization that we mentioned, right? People will not be able to afford therapy. Again, more fortune telling. I will lose clients and not get new ones, and the practice will no longer be able to afford to pay my salary as clinical director, and I will lose income during a time of rising prices. Oh, that says princess, but you know what I meant. And I won't be able to keep putting in money towards my retirement, right? That's a scary thought. That's some fortune telling. I don't know that that's going to happen. I can't help that I have that thought and I have to respond more effectively to that thought. Part of responding more effectively is just being able to say, Rob, you're doing some fortune telling here, some magnification, etc. Local and state budgets will have to make drastic changes if the federal government continues to cut funding and go after DEI programs. Now, my wife is a middle school ESL teacher, so that makes me feel vulnerable, right? Are they going to come after ESL teachers who teach English to immigrants, some of whom might have undocumented status, right? Is the government wanting to deter folks like that from being a part of our system? And so maybe they want to come after my wife. That idea is really scary to me. I don't think it's far-fetched, but I also have to remind myself I have no evidence that that's imminent. So, and yet my brain starts thinking I have to have a plan for what if my wife loses her job, These ones are in red because they're the really ones that are really personal to me. They're the ones that I think um, are why the real reason why I freaked out so much. I did everything right in life and I'm still going to end up broke. This is so unfair, right? Again, pretty big fortune telling, right? I also have to accept that sometimes life is unfair and it's not up to me whether it is or it isn't. I just have to adapt in the best, wisest way possible. We're going to lose all of our hard-earned money and it will be completely my fault. So there's some personalization there, right? And I think my fault because I invested right before, right during like the height of the market. That was dumb, but you know, I kind of decided I couldn't wait forever to make that choice. Or the idea that I should have pulled all my money out of the market as soon as the current president was elected because I didn't trust him. I should have trusted my gut. And yet, I did, so many people I spoke to said, no, 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 that's not the wise choice. And I trusted them. And I don't think they were wrong. But my own personality is attuned to the idea of, personalizing the idea that it really will be all my fault, right? So I got to catch that one and challenge that more effectively. I should have started investing years ago. I should not have waited to start investing at the top of the market 1 month before the election, knowing that the election was a toss-up. I should not have sold out my values, and now I'm experiencing karma, right? I should have trusted my gut and taken my money out of the stock market after the election. So again, all of these should statements where I'm piling on guilt, which only makes me feel worse, more frantic, like I really have to fix this or else it's all my fault because of all those should statements. So we really want to be aware, again, of how those thoughts make folks even like me, who I've been proud of the fact that most of my life was pretty laid back guy. I managed anxiety pretty effectively, but then these really close to home stuff, none of us are immune to it. I'm not going to be able to honor my promise to my father to take care of my mom. That's a really deep one for me. It's really important. I want to be there for her, right? But I also have to sort of going back to that idea of possibility versus probability. It is extremely unlikely that I won't be able to find some way to support my mom, right? To be there for her, um, should the need arise. And we're not currently in that place where the need arises. She's doing okay, right? But again, we want to look at these automatic thoughts, look at how distorted they are, right? But also be able to respond to some of the legitimate concerns. So that leads us to dealing with what ifs, right? Overthinking often involves repeating different forms of what if questions in hopes of trying to eliminate doubt, right? But the truth of the matter is, I was doing more asking the same question over and over again than actually trying to come up with a plan, right? And every time I came up with a plan, I'd come up with some other what if as to, well, here's why that plan wouldn't work if this thing happened, right? So we kind of have to boil it down to the more simple what ifs, right? So instead, again, we try and answer those what if questions while incorporating radical acceptance of things and focusing on what we can control. We include concepts like coping ahead, positive self-talk, and remembering what we can't control, right? So coping ahead is sort of knowing like, okay, if the thing I am fearful of does come to pass, here's what I could do to take care of myself. Here's the skills that I would use, the skills that I teach my clients. I'd do some breathing exercises. I'd practice meditation. I'd practice self-compassion and being fair to myself. I would look at my distorted thoughts and challenge them. And then again, I would pivot towards controlling what I can control, right? I think it's really important for us to commit to some kind of game plan, right? That for me was really helpful, is saying, okay, I've got to talk to my advisor. Now, of course, not all of us are lucky enough to have an advisor, but I got to talk to somebody. And then I've got to commit to some decisions. I need a game plan so that I can almost give myself permission to stop thinking about this, stop researching this. And I'm going to have faith that I can make adjustments when new information finds me, right? So even though I'm off Twitter, even though I'm not watching the news or following political podcasts or economic podcasts, here's what I do know. If something big happens, it's going to find me, right? In fact, funny story, one of the ways, because I've always been economically conservative, it's hard for me to resist. I was I'm in the process of trying to get rid of or deciding if I should get rid of my cable TV, since in my house we mostly stream things. But I did want to be able to still watch football on weekends, so I bought a digital antenna. I hung it on my wall. It works pretty good. And so I'm able to get the local channels without much distortion. Channel 2 comes in pretty bad, but the other channels come in pretty nicely, right? In fact, I got some extra channels that I didn't even know existed. So I was watching Channel 4, that's NBC where I live, and suddenly the news comes on, that image I shared earlier of Trump holding that big, you know, that big thing with all the tariffs on it. And my wife and I were watching, and I instantly went, "Oh, crap." And she didn't quite know what was going on, so I explained to her. Um, and fortunately, my wife is a lot more centered about this stuff than I am. She's like, "Okay, you know, we'll figure it out. Don't worry about it." And again, this because of my own buttons that got pushed, I went down the rat hole and I got really, really worried, right? So we're now in this section of this presentation where we talk about dealing with the what ifs and controlling the choices we can, right? Um, but part of what helps us do that, I think, are having a philosophy, cultivating a philosophy that helps us deal with life struggles, applying faith whenever possible. So for myself, it's not necessarily religious faith, but more of a faith in myself, a certain confidence that although I can't make perfect choices, I have a really great support system around me. Um, I, my wife and I are fairly intelligent people who try and educate ourselves as much as possible, right? So we'll figure out how to get through things if my fears come to pass, right? So that's faith, right? But for those who have religious faith, as a therapist, I want you to lean on that, right? So if the idea that you can put your trust in God, that things will work out according to a larger plan, and that your job is just to keep the faith and control what you can, use the resources and strength that God gave you if you believe in that concept. I think that's a wonderful thing to help us get through difficult times, right? Now, perspective, we also want to remember that history is filled with dark times, and yet people find a way to survive and adapt. So why not me? And hope. It's possible that in the long run, some things might turn out better in unexpected ways. So I can have hope that, hey, maybe, you know, Donald Trump did kind of scare the world, and maybe they are going to drop some of their tariffs, and that'll be a win-win. Things will restabilize, and our businesses will have an opportunity to be more profitable, and then my investments will do better, right? Now, of course, when we talked about values, every individual has to decide, is that system in keeping with their values? How much do I want to participate in that system, right? But we can also talk about other ways in which things change unexpectedly. So going back to the example of my mother, one of my favorite human beings ever, right? If, God forbid, we're in a situation where the economy collapses, her Social Security for some reason goes away, somebody decides that it's not the most efficient use of government money to keep my mom from starving, then of course I'm going to take her in. And how do I know that that wouldn't be the most awesome thing ever, right? My wife and my son both love my mom very much, right? She is a wonderful person. She's lovely company, right? Maybe for my wife and I, it'd be awesome to have an extra person in the house helping out with childcare. Maybe we can go on more date nights, right? So the thing that I'm so afraid of, oh my gosh, what if I can't take care of my mom? Well, maybe the unexpected better outcome is I find out a different way to take care of my family, right? Mom moves in, right? Maybe the family was just missing that one piece and it wouldn't have happened had it not been for the tariffs, right? Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of hoping that nobody's in that position because I know that's not exactly what my mom wants for her life either. But I think having faith, again, that we can make the best out of whatever comes our way, even if it's not what we want to happen, maintaining that attitude, dedicating yourself to that attitude really is a healthy way of dealing with anxiety. And I think I just needed a reminder of that. Hey, all these things I'm afraid of, I can survive. Let's talk a little bit about philosophy. I love philosophy, right? So, one philosophy I really try and employ is something called Stoicism. Stoicism teaches the development of self-control, rational thinking, sounds a lot like CBT to me, and resilience in the face of adversity. It emphasizes focusing on what you can control, accepting what you cannot control, and maintaining inner peace regardless of external circumstances. You can achieve inner peace, resilience, and freedom no matter what life throws at you. Like I mentioned earlier, right? We're going to make the best out of whatever happens, right? Even if it's difficult. And we can do that by living in harmony with nature and reason. You control what you can and you accept what you can't. That's at the heart of Stoicism. We're going to live according to reason and virtue, right? So when we notice big emotions, our job is to use coping skills to take those emotions down to manageable levels, right? And then we're going to apply reason and virtue. In other words, live by our values. And we believe that we can train your mind to respond with calm and clarity and not overreaction. Easier said than done, when we get triggered with our own personal biases, right? Some just quotes that I really enjoy. How does it help to make troubles heavier by bemoaning them? So the Stoics were big on not sort of staying focused on repeating our problems, but instead committing to, all right, we're going to get through this and we'll figure out how. Don't waste your time on what you can't control. Focus on what you can and accept the rest. That's from Zeno of Citium. Make the best of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. I can never say his name correctly, so I'm just going to let you guys read it. If you have passed through life without an opponent, no one can ever know what you are capable of, not even you. So again, that's that sort of making the best of it, maybe the unexpected positive consequences of things that we didn't know, right? So if everything falls apart, maybe that's my opportunity to prove to myself and that I can handle things that all that faith that I've talked about, I can put into action and that, that I can still live the meaningful life that I want to live. Viktor Frankl, not a classic Stoic, but nonetheless, we'll lump him into this school. Holocaust survivor. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. So that's part of radical acceptance as well, right? I can't control things other than my own choices and how I react to stuff, right? Viktor Frankl is an amazingly inspirational guy. I highly recommend reading his stuff. So we suffer more in imagination than reality. I was imagining a lot of terrifying outcomes. That doesn't mean they can't happen, but I have to admit they probably, at least to the degree that I was fearing, are unlikely. And that by repeating those thoughts and indulging those thoughts, I was suffering more. Now, I'm also a big fan of Buddhism, right? So keep in mind, these are my personal philosophies. You guys can adopt your own. You might be aware of some, and then you just have to make sure that you are honoring those philosophies, right? So actually, in front of me, you guys can't see what's behind my computer, but on my wall, I have in Buddhism what's called the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. I read them every day, right? But maybe I wasn't doing the best of jobs of practicing them, right? And so some basic Buddhist concepts that I find helpful when dealing with anxiety and things we can't control. Buddhists believe in impermanence, that they believe that everything in life, people, experiences, emotions, material things, is impermanent and constantly changing. And when we become attached to something, a person, an object, a status, or an idea, we suffer when it inevitably changes or disappears. So clearly, I was overly attached to my money, to my lifestyle, to my vision of how I wanted my future to go and how I would take care of my family. And by reminding myself the importance of non-attachment, I say, I can't control that change happens and that it's less painful when change happens when I can adapt to it because I'm not attached to it. All right. So attachment is a form of clinging to what we desire or what we want to remain the same. According to the Four Noble Truths, as like the basic tenets of the Buddhist religion or philosophy, is that attachment is one of the main causes of suffering. And when we cling to people, things, or even ideas, we set ourselves up for disappointment because they can't last forever. A few more concepts from Buddhism. Fear of change arises from not wanting to lose what we are attached to or fearing the unknown. This fear causes suffering because it creates anxiety, resistance, and dissatisfaction with the present moment. And it also stems from the false sense of control over things. So I was really struggling with fear of change. And my response was to try and control it versus just letting myself experience it. Okay, change is scary. I'm allowed to feel scared, right? But if I practice faith in myself, right? If I commit to certain choices, including committing to making the best from that stoic stance of whatever happens, there really isn't any value in panicking. The path to freedom, the Eightfold Path offers a way to reduce and eventually end suffering by developing wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. Again, I'm not here to teach religion, but that philosophy talks a lot about sort of suffering and impermanence and wisdom, right? So finding your own philosophy to sort of feed into that. There's so many. These are just the ones that attracted me, but there's no shortage of that. So if your religion, if your readings, if you've come across inspirational poets or speakers that speak to these kind of times, make sure you pick up those books and read them again. They can be really helpful. By practicing non-attachment and mindfulness and understanding impertinence, we can let go of cravings and fears and lead to inner peace, which is what we call nirvana, not just an awesome band from the 90s. What we can't and can control is really important. We can't control being able to perfectly predict what will happen, but we can control educating ourselves more within reason. So don't obsessively try and learn everything about economics in hopes of making perfect choices, but learn about it within reason so you can make and commit to reasonable decisions. Even if those decisions don't pan out, at least we suffer less because we can't control everything. Can't control making perfect decisions that turn out the way we want them to, but trying to make wise decisions based on what we know and value. Experiencing difficult emotions, can't control that. And urges to engage in problem behaviors, we can't control urges, but we can notice our emotions and respond in a healthier way. So that's what we call that mindfulness. So when we meditate, we really do get better at noticing the activity of our mind, not attaching to it, and it gives us more freedom to respond. We can't control experiencing a desire for certainty, right? I'm hating uncertainty about my financial future, right? But I can control not extending it by doom scrolling and indulging in overthinking. I was torturing myself trying to come up with a financial plan, the perfect financial plan, when I am not a financial expert. More things you can control, what you choose to focus on, right? So when I was with my son or walking my dog or spending time just holding hands with my wife watching the millionth episode of HGTV, right? Those were really meaningful periods of giving myself a break, right? I chose to focus on those things, even if I felt the urge to look at my phone or check again or email somebody else a question. Being decisive and committing to a course of action until new information finds us and we are called on to make adjustments, right? So for myself, the decision was, okay, I'm not pulling all my money out of the market, but we're going to make some minor changes to be slightly more conservative over the next few years. Um, and I think the adjustments I'm trying to make is cutting unnecessary expenses, even if I know that's not going to be the make or break between whether I'm homeless or not in the future. Again, I know that's unlikely. That's a what if that I don't need to sort of indulge too much. But if it does help me to have a sense of I can control little things, right? Like cutting the cable bill, canceling certain memberships. Maybe when I go on vacation, we cut the vacation a day short so I can go back to work sooner, recoup some of the money I wouldn't be making when I'm on vacation, one less day of paying for meals and hotel rooms, etc. Little things like that. Again, they might not make the hugest difference in the world, but they give me some sense of control that is helpful. So again, we can control how much we spend and how much we save. We can control the choice to use coping strategies to get through difficult times. And I was making the choice not to. Just getting good sleep, I think, is a good coping strategy. I was choosing to not do that. And then I had to remind myself, we need to get back on track here. So I bought a Kindle and I started reading history books instead of looking at Twitter and, keeping myself in a state of terror all night long. Um, Seeking help when we need it and offering help when we can offer it, right? My very dear friend offered help to me. He took me out to dinner and we just chatted and it helped me put things back into perspective in a way that other things weren't. So if you can be that helper, great. If you can receive that help, that's great too, right? Or if you can ask for that help, that's wonderful, right? Um, Without, again, engaging in excessive reassurance seeking, but more like, hey, I don't really need advice on finances. I just need some way to help myself get out of my head. That's good help, right? Getting creative about how we can take care of each other. As I said earlier, if the worst happens, I know I can get creative in terms of how can I take care of my family? How can I make sure I don't end up quote unquote homeless? And even if God forbid I do, okay, then maybe I got a big family. Maybe that means that a bunch of us are gonna, get together and we're gonna learn how to live. You know, maybe I'll move a bunch of people into my house, and this um, basement office that I'm sitting in becomes a bedroom for my nephews, and they'll pay a small rent, and there'll be more childcare, and then maybe one of them learns how to garden, and we'll get chickens, and we'll have our own eggs that we don't have to worry about the price of. Maybe we can get creative about figuring out new and cool ways to um, still have beautiful lives that we value. And again, revisiting our values. I am not planning on getting a second job. Um, I'm not planning on making any major uh, cuts in expenditures that would harm my son's well-being or my wife's ability to sort of take good care of herself as well. So we want to make sure that whatever choices we make, they align with our values, what's important to us. Difficult economic times can put us in positions where we have to make really difficult choices, right? So again, I'm so fortunate that there are some choices I don't have to make, but there are also choices that I'm choosing to make, right? For those of us who aren't as fortunate to have, that 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 ability to sort of navigate things the way I'm describing, then you know that then I think part of sort of keeping that faith while also having a plan is really important. The idea of somehow, some way, most of us who have access to being able to watch me on the internet today, right? Most of us aren't going to end up homeless or without food, um, but that maybe we can again foster values that are more about community, taking care of one another. Um, Maybe life changes in a positive, unexpected way. That's a really good thing. So again, you know, we're coming down to the conclusion of our presentation. I hope that what we talked about today was helpful to some of you in terms of the skills you use. I think it's really important for us to control what we can, look at our thoughts and sort of challenge them when they're catastrophic or fortune telling based. Make sure we use those coping skills to take good care of ourselves during difficult times. Make sure we commit to making a plan, sticking to a plan, not overthinking the plan, and then adapting when it makes sense to adapt. So again, acting in accordance with your values, in spite of your fears and anxiety, you choose to do what you think is right and helpful. In my case, continue to do things that make me and my family happy within reason. Continue to help my loved ones within reason. Continue to make wise financial decisions and continue to maintain work-life balance. Those are some of my core values, and I'm going to try my best, in spite of what happens in the world, to have faith that I can maintain that and get by somehow, some way. So anyhow, that brings us to the end of our presentations. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at robert.zambrano@stressandanxiety.com. Thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful. And if you're interested in working with one of our therapists, all of whom are experts in teaching how to manage anxiety more effectively, please go to our website for more information. That website is www.stressandanxiety.com. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day.